It is a beautiful day, you guys. Thank you so much for getting on this webinar. I love presenting to people. I love sharing information. I love meeting new people. So I'm super sad that it has to be through a screen, if you will. I like to meet people who come to these events. I want to meet parents who are just like me. I want to meet parents that are committed to their kids and looking for hope for their kids. I am the parent who never stopped looking. I never, in a shadow of a doubt of what was going on in my brain, was willing to stop looking for what my son needed. And when I found it, it changed my world. It changed his world. It changed a lot for me. And I knew I needed to bring it to you. I knew that I had to step up, which necessarily isn't always the most comfortable thing to be in front of an entire room presenting information. But since I'm there doing it as a mom, as a loving human, and as somebody who wants to help move your child forward, it's okay with me. It really is. So I love meeting people. I'm a people person. I'd rather see you in person. Unfortunately, it has to be on a virtual workshop. But we're still going to have fun. My jokes might not be as funny if you can't see me in real person, but I know that a lot of us need to have fun right now. I'm sure a lot of you wish you could have got out of your home. I am sure a lot of you wish that you could have called up a babysitter to come watch your kids and take your husband out or your wife out and have a free dinner and come meet other folks like them, get in a room for some answers. This is what I'll tell people when they come in the door after I've met them and figure out who you here for, what kind of answers are you looking for? What's your concerns about your child or your grandchild, or maybe even you're a teacher, and I know that I teach continuing education to teachers, and they're here often. After I do that, then I'm going to let them know that what this workshop, and used to be dinner, is about is not, it's not actually a much work, really. I mean, you might be the note taker, so I'm going to tell you, take some notes. Unfortunately, you're not going to get our folder with all of our information and all of our research articles and all of our handouts, but you're just going to be able to follow along. You'll get that when you come to my office. But I want you to be a note taker, but there's not a lot of work to do, which is the cool part. I know you've probably been to workshops before where you're making like sticker charts for your kids and new goal setting stuff, and that can be really great and wonderful. But what I want you to do is just sit back and relax, because this is not about work. It's not about you having to necessarily change anything. It's not anything to sell you. This is not for you to join my MLM. This is not for you to buy my supplementation. This is not for you to get my Etsy weighted blankets. By the way, I don't make any of those things. I love that kind of stuff. I love essential oils. I love weighted blankets and weighted vests, and I love diffusers and supplementation. I love all that stuff. Those are great tools to help a body, and they're great tools typically to manage a symptom, whatever's going on inside of your child's body, right? You might be like, this is deficient or absent, and maybe they need this to be able to help it. And this is not that. This is for you to sit down and understand why. And that is why I'm bringing it to you. I'm going to have an opportunity for you at the end of this to bring your child to me. But what I'm wanting to share with you is hope, is answers, is why does this, whatever it is that you're concerned about, XYZ behavior, why does this illness, why does this diagnosis exist in my child? Because once we figure out the why and what's causing it, the path to help is so much clearer. We're going to talk a lot about how it starts, why it starts, and what some of the action steps are to move forward from that. And some of the best clarity and some of just the most heart-wrenching details that I got about what was going on with my son. And actually, he's this one over here in the plaid. I'm going to share his story. His name's Landon. I have my family picture on here. And I'm also embarrassed to know that you guys know that I use a PC. I think Mac users are legit and I want to be one, but for now this is PowerPoint and I'm using a PC. So one day I'll have a MacBook and I will be coming to you live from that. But till then, until I'm more legit of a technology user, I've got a PC and I've got my family picture on here. But I was literally just awestruck on what was causing my son's troubles. I was up Googling late at night. I'm sure all of you have done that. Sleepless nights, spousal arguments, other kids feeling stressed, other kids feeling, neglected and underappreciated, school teachers not really having the answers, but understanding that, something's wrong. And a lot of places that I took him asking for the answer why, I got, here's what we could do about what he has. And while that's great, and they really wanted to help my kid, and I really love a lot of those people, I needed to know why. That was me. I drove my mom crazy as a why child, saying, but why? But why? Because it didn't make sense to me unless I had the why behind it. And I had started to get some of the answers, which is great. I'm going to queue up my PowerPoint here so you guys can look at this. But when I heard the story of the perfect storm, when I heard about what sensory truly is, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I know you can't see everything. When I teamed up with the National Family Wellness Foundation, when I heard Dr. Tony Ebel speak on the perfect storm, which, by the way, is a chiropractor who'd been doing this kind of work in helping children just like my son Landon and like your children for over a decade, when I finally heard the story, it was a really big deal, and I knew I had to bring it to other parents. When my life was changed, and my child's life was substantially changed, I feel like he had a second chance at life and the potential that he had inside of him. This is what I decided to dedicate my life to. And now, unknowingly, my doors became flooded with parents like you, flooded with children like Landon, flooded with so many kids who had been down this perfect storm path that had led to many focus, sensory, spectrum, chronic illness, immunocompromised, autoimmune, asthma, allergies, constipation, ear infections, you name it. They'd all had these components. And we're going to talk about what that is. There's my little guy that you guys saw. We're going to talk about what that is and what that perfect storm looks like. And a lot of what we're going to be examining is stress. I know that we all know that there's stress in this world, and man, could there not be a more stressful time that you've lived through. I don't know how old you are, but I am nearing my fourth decade of life, and I don't remember anyone making me feel like I didn't have freedom and that I had to be fearful of something that, once again, looking for the why, that doesn't quite make sense to me and to my family, and keeping us indoors, right? Our environment right now is so stressful. The changes are dramatic. And when you're talking about a child with a struggle, they don't adapt well, right? We all know this. Change isn't great. Transitions aren't great. New scenery isn't great. What we're doing all the time is taking in environmental cues. And right now, our environmental cues are fear. Right now, our environmental cues are restriction. Our environmental cues are hoarding. When you're out in the grocery store, when you're looking around, 85% of what we're picking up is nonverbal. And your nervous system, it sees and remembers everything. So if all you're seeing around you is people in masks, you cannot see their face, you don't know if they're smiling, you don't know if they're happy, they look like a threat to you, they're staying 6 feet away, they're avoiding you, they're avoiding eye contact, they're not smiling, there's no conversations, there's glass between you and the cashier checking you out, there's not food on the shelves, that's fear. And when our kids are stripped from what they had as a liberty and a right to go to school, and you might be a homeschool parent and you might have already been around this 24/7. But for many of you who now have your kids home and you're looking for a solution and you're watching your child not see their friends, not have their routine, not have their lunches, not have the connections that they're used to, the structure that they're used to, this is an entirely accelerated conversation. We have a conversation about kids that are struggling in their everyday life. And right now, everyday life is not what it used to be. And there's a big change that's going on inside their life. So I know that this conversation is even more important today than it ever was before. I know that the other kids in your home, if you have any, are stressed, because when they see that child stressed, once again, that's a cue to them of fear, of stress, of anger, of possible resentment, of triggering them to feel like they're different, right? Whether they're the child that's struggling or the sibling of the child that's struggling, there's a difference here in behavior. There's a difference in the perception of the world. And if you're a parent right now whose world is changing, whether you are laid off or you are a stay-home parent who's now really staying home with your children 24/7, whether your spouse is now also home with you, working from home, this world is it's a lot different. There's a lot of moving pieces to what's going on, but I know that there's going to be some stress there. And I am 100% for healthy homes, healthy marriages, and healthy, vibrant vibrations of energy throughout that home and in between those relationships. And that's not happening right now. That's not happening for many, many people right now. We're all, I say this often, we're all in the same storm. And now we've got even another pun with it here with the perfect storm. We're all in this storm, we're in different boats. Some of us might be in little rowboats that are barely making it, right? One more little wave, it's going to tip us over and drown us. Others might be in a battleship where you're barely feeling the bumps, and everything in between. So be mindful of that, of how families are feeling, how families are stressful. This is by no means a judgment when you're out in the grocery store and seeing the fear. You might be the person in the mask at the grocery store who is fearful and who is trying to get food for your family and who is trying to get toilet paper and baby wipes and diapers and things like that. This is a real, true storm that we're in. And if you picture this, even appropriately, your child has been living in a storm already. Now you've just joined them in a different storm that's probably feeding to their little storm. So if you're thinking right now, man, I haven't really had a good normal day in a while, you know what? That's the same way your child's feeling, that they may not have ever had a good day since they were born. And we're going to take a real strong look at that and really dive into what starts this storm. I know you guys can read part of this slide. I'm not sure if you're on a device or a PC, and you can see that we're looking at some of these early warning signs and what trauma, toxins, thoughts. We're going to take a look at all of those in even more depth and figure out what exactly is adding all up to all of this, because there's one component that we're missing often. I've thrown this slide in. I've put this slide in and I've taken this slide out, and I've decided to put it back in because I started doing a survey to ask people if they had any idea that this existed. Because I know when I had my Landon, I had no idea 1 in 6 kids from the ages of 2 to 8 were diagnosed with a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. That number blows my mind every time I actually look at that, I pulled that off the CDC website, and whether you think, the CDC is legit at this moment or not, that's a really big deal. Those numbers can't lie. They're getting that straight from the pediatrician's office. And that to me was a heartbreaker, because that's an overwhelming majority of our future that's having a struggle right now. And we haven't gotten any further down the path as to figuring out why, or to find a good resource to helping them. And I know a lot of people will bring up genetics and medication, which I'm going to bring up to on my next slide and my next point here. Unfortunately, that hasn't changed anything, right? And we know that chemical alterations of medication aren't helping in the long run. It might help cover up a symptom very short term, but in the long run, we're seeing more problems with that, and with emotional health in our teens, especially with our teens that are suffering with anxiety and depression. We're going to look at that as well. So here's what we got. I bring this slide up because once again, I was the Y child, but I was actually raised in a really small town in Wisconsin. And we, other than driving my mom crazy, we didn't have a lot of kids that were really struggling. And I can literally look back and think back to the kids who were, and some of it really made sense to me of, you know what, that makes sense, that he is having some behavioral issues. His parents are divorced, his dad's in jail, his mom's struggling, right? She's a single mom living in a trailer with not many resources. That made sense to me that kid was struggling. One of the other people I'm thinking about with type 1 diabetes who was having troubles, couldn't keep up in gym class, and one person that was overweight. But you can think that there wasn't a lot of struggling children. And unfortunately, now there's 1 in 6, right, that have got a diagnosis from ages 2 to 8. That's a big deal. And it's even more so in teenagers, by the way. That's a whole new teen anxiety is another workshop I'm going to tackle here next month. And with these 2 rules that we had was don't call kids names and don't do drugs. We used to have the DARE program. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was in the 90s for us, a really big deal. And unfortunately, like I said, we are chemically altering our children. This chemically alters their brains. And a lot of our conversation that we're going to have today is going to be about the brain and how it perceives its world and how stress affects it. And unfortunately, even when kids come in who are medicated, and patients ask me this all the time, well, my child is on medication, does it matter? Well, yeah, that of course that matters. I want to know how their nervous system is running on not chemically altered, but that doesn't mean we can't help. Right? That doesn't mean that your brain and your body can't heal, can't rest, can't work its way out of this storm. A lot of people think, well, once they've started down the medication track, that it's going to turn to another one and another one and another one, and they've got to stay on that road. But it doesn't have to be that way. Our bodies are designed to self-heal, to self-regulate, to be healthy. They don't have to struggle, which is the most beautiful thing. It was the most beautiful thing that I had ever heard of. So, and you know what? I think I was told that, but I didn't really fully understand it until I started watching the miracles, not only in my own son and my own family, but in my practice, in the kids and adults that heal. Their body knows what to do if it's given the right information. So here's something that I'm going to have you guys watch, a quick little video. It's an awareness video, and I want you to pay attention. They're going to ask you how many passes the team in white makes, and I want you to throw it up in the comments here if you've seen this video before, but if you haven't. Okay, rewatch it. They're going to rewind. Okay, there he is. Right in the middle. So whether you've seen that awareness video or not, yeah, I mean, it's completely your brain, right? It's really easy to miss something that you weren't looking for. You were looking for the passes. And when I watched that video, I know that I felt not only like I missed that moment, but I also felt like I'm at basketball actually right now. I'm being passed back and forth so quickly that I am missing the why and what is happening. And that one piece of what I was missing for Landon and my other kids and all the children that I now serve, this is the key. This is the big deal. This is the ribbon and the bow on top of why was my child struggling. So we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this moonwalking bear. We're going to look at the start of the perfect storm. We're going to look at environmental factors. We're going to look at stress, and we're going to look at the path that these kids tend to be on. And a lot of what we're looking at is that brain. It's the most beautiful organ in our body. We know that the brain is the master control. Right? We know that the brain is in charge of everything. We know the brain calls the shots. We know the brain can change. The brain is most placid from birth to 3. We're learning so much about the brain. Modern science has come so far from your brain is your brain, and this is what you get, and that's what you got, and good luck, all the way over to your brain is always changing. It is like the Amazon River. You can't step in the same place at any given time ever again, because there's so much happening inside of that thing. There is 300 trillion bits of information that are reaching that brain every second. You're consciously aware of 50. So here's what we need to look at. Those 300 trillion bits of information that are reaching our brain, how? How is that input getting there? How might it get off? Because we're going to look a little bit further into this, and we're going to know that input equals output. And what we're often examining is the output. We're examining the illness. We're examining the behavior. We're examining the lack. We're examining what we do not like about our situation. And we're not looking at where is the information coming from? Where's the input coming from? And our environment's going to be a really big deal. And how our brain takes in that information is going to be a really big deal. But how it travels about is even a bigger deal. So this poster is one of my favorite posters. It's hanging up in my office, and it says you live your life through your nervous system. And when you sit and think about that, it is exactly what happens. You live your life through your nervous system. Everything you think, say, do, taste, smell, touch, every single emotion from laughter to crying to happiness to anger, it's got to be processed through that nervous system that is yours. That is your world. That's how you perceive things. That's why some people can taste an apple and love it and others hate it. Taste a banana and love it, others hate it. That's why some people can be sitting through this workshop anxious and nervous, and others are like excited and like, oh my gosh, give me more information. It's how we perceive our world. It's how we live our lives, and it's our nervous system, and how that thing is strung, wired, and developed is way back to preconception. And we're going to talk a bit about that as well, and how that thing takes in the world is a really, really big deal. Because you might be looking at your kid like, wow, that nervous system that you're living your life through, it is whacked, right? It is stressed. It doesn't know what's going on. You might be looking around being like, this is a vibrant, beautiful place and world we're living in. And there's other people dressed in like hazmat suits, throwing toilet paper in their cart like their life depends on it. It's a really big deal, you guys. And this is, once again, this is not judgment. This is who we become throughout our lives. And this development from birth to 3 is huge. We're making 1 million new neurological connections a second from birth to 3, but we are still changing into our 70s and 80s. Our brain doesn't stop making new neurological connections. In our 30s and 40s, we're making 1 million new neurological connections a year. Well, birth to 3, they're making that many in a second. It's just mind blowing, right? So early stress really matters. Here's another little tie-in to your nervous system, and one of my favorite people, who's Dr. Bruce Lipton, and write that name down, because if you guys don't follow him, if you guys don't know who he is, that man, oh geez, he has got the most beautiful lens on the world, but he's also very factual about it. And he's extremely intelligent about it and what he has looked at and figured out. He was highly awarded for epigenetics. If you remember that, where they had found out that it wasn't genes that were responsible, it's the environment that was turning these genes on that was responsible for many of the people that wanted to say this is a genetic, predisposition, or this is all in my genes, right? It's not the cards you were dealt, it's how you play your hand. He wrote this quote: "The function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells." Just like we were talking about in living your life through that nervous system, the perception, that coordination, and that behavior of all cells. Your brain is in control of every single organ, cell, and tissue inside of your body. Every single one of those things change when you're feeling something different. We have physiological changes in how we feel, how we act, and it's all dependent on our perception. So you guys, this is a big deal. People don't look at the nervous system. They don't look at the brain. I will ask so many families what they've had checked on their kid, right? Some people come in with binders of like, here's where we've been, neuropsych, right? They've checked so much out and they haven't checked the nervous system. Like, here's their eye report, here's from vision therapy, here's from the psychologist, here's from the psychiatrist, here's from the counselor, here's their results of their ear, nose, throat doctor, here's the lung, here's the respiratory. They have checked every system in the body. They might have even checked blood, urine, and stool. But what they haven't ever looked at, there's no check in the box for the master control system. Have you looked at the brain and the spinal cord to see how they're communicating, to see how they're perceiving, to see how it's taking information, to see if there's interference, to see if there's disruption, to see if it can even communicate with the eyes, the tongue, the nose, the throat? Are you looking at that? And usually the answer is no. Nobody's looking at that. And that's extremely disheartening for me. But I'm the why person, right? I have to go back to say, well, why? I have to go back to the beginning and look at and say, why would this be here in the first place before I can move on and move forward? Things just have to make sense. Someone might come to me and say, you know what, I've tried, we tried OT. It just worked a little bit. Well, how well is your child's nervous system? Is it working at 70%, 60%? You're going to get 60% of the benefit you could have had their nervous system been working appropriately. Same thing with dietary changes. Like, oh yeah, it worked to a certain point. We got like 50, 80% better. Let's look to see if the brain and the gut are even connected appropriately for that system to work. Are they able to absorb and digest their food? Is the brain able to communicate appropriately with a gut-brain connection? It's a really big buzzword right now, or topic, and we call it brain-gut connection. But either way, that's a highly important system that we need to look at as well. And it's going to be here in a later slide. I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit because I need to talk about stress in that nervous system before I get to the way it's supposed to be. We're going to look at what's disturbing it right now. And stress is the number one. We all know this is not a secret, right? Stress is the cause of 90% of illnesses and diseases in our world and in our country. And we want to say, well, we live in a stressful world, right? Me as a chiropractor, I'm looking at how well are you adapting to the stress? What kind of stress are you choosing? And is that stress stuck there? So let's take a look at how your nervous system, how your central nervous system, your brain and your spinal cord communicate. It's got two modes of operation. And one mode is that stress mode. One mode is the fight or flight. And I know many parents who come to my workshops, I will say, have you heard of sympathetic fight or flight response? And all the parents are like, yes, we live there, right? 100%. They know exactly what that is. That sympathetic fight or flight response is something that is inborn, innate, and designed for survival. What a beautiful thing, right? We want to live. It should be really short-lived, however. It should be able to handle whatever threat comes our way. It should be able to turn on, handle it, turn back off, go to calm balanced. Instead, it starts getting turned on and never turned off. Instead, we turn up the volume on that fight or flight response and we start living in that fight or flight response. So let's just look for just a little bit about that fight or flight response. I know all of you have been there, of course, right? You're probably there today where you were just like, well, I can't handle one more thing, right? Everything, volume is turned up. So what happens is you perceive a threat. We've got a saber-toothed tiger here chasing this caveman. You're running from a bear, or it might just be your toddler, right? Picking up their mess for the 300th time in the phone ring. However, there's a threat that's right there in front of you. The heart needs to start pumping a lot faster and a lot harder. The blood pressure goes up, the heart rate goes up, your muscles are ready to fight or flee. So the blood's going to be shunted from the vital internal organs out to the limbs to fight or flee. Those muscles are going to be just juiced, right? It's got to run on glucose. It's got to have a real fast sugar supply. Forget about a salad, right? Forget about high dense nutrients. It's got to live on some quick sugar. Glucose is going to be up. Cortisol goes up. Insulin is going to go up to handle all that sugar that's in there. And the hormone cycle starts getting off. And I'm probably talking to parents right now. We're like, oh, my hormones are whacked and my adrenals are out of control. Or you might be in adrenal fatigue. That's you from a lifetime of stress. However, the senses are turned up. The pupils dilate. You've got to take in everything. The volume in your ears turned way up so you can hear, right? Hear the enemy. Run, flee, senses up. The touch is going to be turned way up. And what gets turned down is digestion, is your immune system, because they run on the reverse side of that nervous system that can't be on at the same time as this fight or flight response. And here's a really cool example that we've looked at in science and to see exactly what's going on inside the body. And what happens, if you've ever seen this analogy before, I do this in a lot of my workshops so parents can get a really just simple understanding of what's happening, is the flipping your lid analogy. But you've got a prefrontal cortex in your brain that's developing, right? It has to develop throughout youth, and in men, we know it doesn't even fully develop until like 25 to 28. However, that prefrontal cortex is what's responsible for organized, rational, creative, calm, higher level thinking and thought. And that prefrontal cortex, what we call your lid, gets flipped under stress. And this amygdala, this fight or flight response, this guy starts running the show. This guy, that's repulsive. It is a little repulsive sometimes. That's reactive and impulsive, starts taking over. So you've all talked to somebody that's in fight or flight. Not creative, right? Not reacting the way you wanted to, not taking in logical information. They're here. They're here with their lid flipped, running that amygdala. And often when we've got stress there that's early and stress there that's often, the kids start being wired for stress to have a loose lid all the time. So you get a loose lid on there. We had one more component to stress, and this is where they live. And the coolest part, because I don't think I told you in the beginning, but I think you know, I'm a pediatric chiropractor. Wow, I work with the central nervous system. This is a beautiful, beautiful thing to be able to influence that component of health. And what we found is that during the delivery of a chiropractic adjustment, you're affecting, not where people are like, oh, I went to the chiropractor because my a little kink in my neck, right? Or low back was out and I had the sciatica pain. and you're there because of your bones in your spine. What's actually happening when you're getting a chiropractic adjustment is being delivered. The only place that's changing is in the brain. It's in the prefrontal cortex with its ability to calm that fight or flight response, with its ability to communicate with the rest of the body more clearly, more concisely, to stimulate the other side of that nervous system, which is resting, healing, and digesting side of your nervous system. And in turn, things work better, right? In turn, there's less pain because tight, restricted muscles is fight or flight. It doesn't need to be stretched to death. It needs to be calmed down neurologically. There is a nerve that's in control of that muscle, not the other way around. And I know people get backwards, and I know people think that chiropractors and physical therapists and massage therapists all do the same thing, right? Let's work out that muscle and until it, until it gives in. And that's absolutely not what it's about. It's about specific, gentle, and effective neurological adjustments to help your neurology, to help your child's vital developing neurology. And I know a lot of you guys are looking and saying, okay, I get that, fight or flight, my kids are in it. What exactly is happening? And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how this fight or flight component and how it builds inside the body, where you would say, I get that. Now I see the full picture. I understand that. Now I get why the brain is perceiving everything as a threat. Now I get why the brain isn't learning. I get why the brain isn't communicating effectively. I get why the brain can't go to sleep. I get why the brain maybe is unable to fight off a virus or has a gut issue, because I told you that those systems get turned down instead of turned up. And nerves that fire together, those 1 million neurological connections that are happening every second, new, in your child, are getting wired, unfortunately, for stress instead of for calm, organized, rational development, growth. Kids should be in growth and development. That's where the majority of their life should be. That's where they are, where they're sleeping. That's why babies require so much more rest than adults do, because they're getting growth and development for longer. So let's look at this path that what we tend to see people get on. What we've done, and I know you wouldn't be able to tell this by watching me in a workshop video, but what I've done is an excellent job of listening to parents. Not only because I can feel the pain that they have because I've been there, but I'm listening to what the parents are saying. Because unfortunately today, and I hope this isn't you, and I hope I'm not talking to you, but unfortunately today, a lot of parents are told that they're wrong, their intuition is off, that it's just normal, that anything that you might be bringing up to someone of authority that you would trust, whether it's a doctor or a therapist, and you're saying, hey, this doesn't seem right. Unfortunately, we're told it's fine. It's going to be fine. It's normal. And what we've done as pediatric chiropractors is be specifically and highly trained to listen, because I know that a parent's gut and intuition, especially right now, you guys are living with those kids. If you're not stuck in fight or flight right now, listening in, I know that you know your child best. I know that you've watched them from conception, preconception, even till now, and you know what's happening, and you need to be told by somebody that all of it matters, and that you can trust your gut, and that you were right. This is not normal. It's become very, very common. But now you've seen that 1 in 6 kids are being diagnosed. That's not normal, but it sure is common. And it sure is hurting our youth. So let's look at where some of this comes from. And when we do intakes, about 85% of the patients are telling us that they've had these struggles. Now, you might not have every single one of these, but I know that you can follow this path and completely understand what we're talking about when we say this. But fertility and pregnancy challenges, preconception, are a really big deal. The brain and the spinal cord are the first things to develop in utero, that nervous system, that baby's nervous system, even before the heart, because something's got to tell the heart to beat. And we're getting our mother's blood bath. You get your mother's nervous system. So everything you are thinking, saying, doing, how you're living your life is developing that child. And once again, this is not a judgment for moms that are like, oh my gosh, I was so stressed during the pregnancy. I was so worried during the pregnancy. I was so, whatever, this during the pregnancy. Yeah, I get it. I was too. I didn't fully understand that either. We just want to kind of separate the baby from the mom. And unfortunately / fortunately, we are one. They get our food, they get our thoughts, they get our emotion, they get our blood, they get our nervous system, right? They get it all. And I know for me, when I was pregnant with Landon, I was extremely worried. I had just had a miscarriage right before that. I had just opened a new practice. I moved to Idaho where I didn't know a soul, and lived in an apartment that I hated. It was extremely stressful time. I wasn't putting this together that I could very possibly be setting the stage for my son to live in stress. Some of the people and patients that I get to talk to, fortunately, I'm privileged to be able to talk to lots of families. When we look back into the pregnancy, for some of the kids that have the biggest struggles and the biggest challenges, mom might say, my marriage was jacked during that time, or there was a murder. I lost my home. My husband lost his job. There's some big, big things that happened during that pregnancy that just set, like I said, a stage for stress. We start pre-wiring that child for stress. And if we have intervention, we call it augmentation now to be a little bit more gentle, but honestly, it's an injury during the birth process and the delivery process, this is going to add to it. So, and when I'm saying an intervention, I am talking about Pitocin. I'm talking about an epidural, an episiotomy, mom laying on her back, not using gravity. I'm talking about vacuum, forceps, and a cesarean section. All of these prolonged labors, fast labors, all of these matter. And before I had children, I remember talking to a midwife who just seemed, she was so wise and one of those like just down to earth souls. But when she had told me that she would watch a birth and a mother, and she'd be with them throughout their prenatal care, and then watch the child come into the world, she said, I could predict with, whatever certainty of how that child's life would go and how their personality would be. And I was thinking like, well, that's kind of cuckoo, that's really weird. But I didn't know about this. I didn't know about the perfect storm. I didn't understand that the nervous system was developing the baby. I didn't understand how big birth injury and stress on a baby's delicate fibers and delicate cranial bones could be in predisposing them to stress and to setting them up for a nervous system that's not only living in stress, but having altered input. And man, she was pretty wise. She really was. Because unfortunately, when we start getting those added up, when whether there was a pregnancy or fertility challenge, when we're looking at a birth injury, often the only way the baby can tell us is through stress, through crying, through being colicky. Remember we talked about the gut-brain connection, through that digestive tract being off, being high and tight, everything coming back up and being constipated. That's a colicky baby, one that can't turn their head and nurse and latch. It's a pretty big deal. And especially so much so we're even in some of the children that I examine, I can still see the flat spot on their head from when their neck was so injured that they didn't want to rotate in one direction, and they kept it there long enough to flatten cranial bones. It's a really big deal that people are missing and not looking at. And what will happen is that stress colicky baby, that's normal to have, and it's actually common, they get their very first tooth, right? There's some extra mucus in their mouth. Their immune system's turned up because there's now going to be a hole and some exposure to the outside world through that tooth. And that hole where that tooth is, that thing gets turned up. They get their very first ear infection. They can't drain. Everything is tight and stressed. They're not getting the right neurological signaling. And that first ear infection, why it might be viral, not bacterial. They're usually given an antibiotic, and it'll continue to often escalate into ear tubes, right? Adenoids removed. All the first primary areas of that immune system in the tonsils and the adenoids, all those things are turned way up. They can't turn off because that immune system has been so depressed for so long. We'll often get sick, stressed toddlers, those terrible twos that never end, right? They just don't stop. You're like, oh my gosh, now we're into threes, right? The troubled threes, that's where Landon, I was like, oh dude, like I thought two was a little bit of a circus, but three is a mess. And this is when I really started noticing what was going on with him, because he didn't have what I thought was a birth injury, but he had a really fast birth. And he nursed and latched well after he was adjusted for the first time, actually. And he seemed fine. He was a little constipated. It was when we got gravity up against him, which I'll show you about here in a little bit, and why that matters when he was starting to learn to walk and then started really settling into that new neuro pattern, is when I really started to see the meltdowns in him, and I really started to see him not sleeping and not wanting to listen and not having an interest in engaging with people. And then into preschool is where he was a real stuck kid. He couldn't physically learn. He literally couldn't learn. I'm going to show a picture of his handwriting here in a little bit towards the end, but he was a stuck kid. And what I'm so grateful for is that this path didn't continue, because what we'll usually see when somebody comes in and brings their teen or tween in, they're exhausted, they're angry, or they're anxious teen in. And that's not what we want. So what'll happen is we'll say they're going to outgrow it, right? They're going to outgrow it. That toe walking, they're going to outgrow it. And instead they grow into something else. And they grow into something else. And their immune system gets so depressed that they grow into something else. And then you're looking around, if you're anything like me, and thinking, man, this is just not the life that I had envisioned for my child. This is not what I thought it was going to be. But we had slowly pushed outside our value system at such a slow rate that I didn't realize where we were at. I didn't realize that his stress had pushed my boundaries so far till I finally I was just in that mess with him for so long. I was in that storm with him. And I know you are parents, you get stuck in that storm with those kids, that you have a hard time realizing how far outside your means you are until you start looking around being like, I don't like this day, week, month, year. There's something terribly wrong. I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start. Is it my parenting? Is his diet? Is it the school? Is it, is it his bed? Like, does he need a new pillow? Is it the new paint on the wall? Yeah, you're right. You're grasping at things. Does he need a parasite cleanse? Like, you're grasping at what do they need? And unfortunately, they need to have the stress removed from their body, because it's been pent up and built up and it's stuck. And that nervous system is working around a stuck stress inside of a system. And when it gets into our teen years, and then unfortunately into our adult years, when you're looking at burnt out, stressed out parents, where you might be right now, the storm path has continued. And our nervous system, that life, right? The nervous system that we're living in is not the one that we wanted. Like, we want to be calm and organized, right? We want to have a bunch of energy and be vibrant and be able to give to others. And you're like, I don't even want to go to the grocery store today. I'm saying that like legit. No one wants to go to the grocery store right now. But had we been in our normal environment, you're like, I'm too tired, right? I'm too tired to call that friend. I don't want to even check in on them. I'm just exhausted. There's too much. And you're thinking, like, who was that person that I used to be that had all that energy? who loved life, who called her friends, who went out on girls' nights or guy nights, and who had, hosted parties. That person's missing and absent. And it doesn't mean that you can't get that person back, but it does mean that there's too much stress inside of their lives and your nervous system is working over too much of it, and it needs to have it released. And I already mentioned earlier, and if you're joining us now, that's totally fine. But when I talked about those specific, gentle, and effective chiropractic adjustments, putting that lid on tighter, every single adjustment, closing down that lid so that stress doesn't get to you, so that you're adaptable to stress, so that you don't hang on to stress and let it build up until you live here with a lid that is freaking out at you. It's gotta stop. You've got to find some answers. And yes, your environment really, really matters. We're going to look at that stuck thing that chiropractors are working on. That stuck stress is called a subluxation. It's that big red word. That's what we're working on. When people are like, you brought your kid to a chiropractor? No, they're better to understand it. They have a bad back. And like I mentioned, it's not about the bones. It is absolutely not about the bones. It is about that nervous system, and it's about the stress that happens and what feeds that stress cycle, what feeds that subluxation, and what feeds that stress and what bottles it up inside are the physical, chemical, and emotional stresses of the world. Yes, chemical stress matters. It matters big time. It does. It will feed that subluxation like no other. It's going to cause interference, irritability, irritation, inflammation inside the body. It's not going to help by any means. Physical stressors, yes, your kid's sitting at a desk for hours on end is a physical stress. You might have a kid who is a sensory seeker, who's always looking to get movement from other regions of the body. We're going to talk about that in a little bit and why that matters. But that physical stress, yes, that's going to add up. If you're being a couch potato and you don't get up and move your body, which is how your brain is fed from the electrical impulses of movement and muscles, it matters. Emotional stress is probably the biggest component to that, because whether you are in a stressful event or you're thinking about that stressful event, your brain doesn't know the difference. It still responds with fight or flight. It doesn't know. The physiological change is the same. So taking these three components, and here's the thing, I used to break these down quite a bit and say, okay, if you need, some retraining with, you were using a bumbo seat and a baby Bjorn, and these are the ergonomically sound things you need to do. Or if you had chemical stress in your home and you're letting your kids play and eat out of plastic and toxic water, here's what you need to do. And if you've got too much emotional stress and your child needs, counselor, behavioral therapy, whatever it is, here's what you can do. Maybe team parenting coaching. Here's what you do. And there are beautiful, amazing people in this world that do all those things. So I don't break all that down anymore. I know you can Google those things. And if you need a resource, I will give it to you. I have those resources and I work really closely with those people that help with those things. But I'm not going to break this down during this workshop, but I need this for a visual for you guys to understand what's going to feed that stress response. We are extremely specific about that central nervous system and about that subluxation that's right there in the middle to get that removed. And I always say, my job as a pediatric chiropractor is to remove the subluxations that are in your child's life and in your life. Your job, once we get every single organ, cell, and tissue fully connected there, your job is to choose your stress wisely, right? Your job is to feed your body well. And if you need training with that, go for it. But if you want a healthy, overall, solid body and solid health, and you want that energy back, and you want your child to be vibrant and energetic, these are some of the things that you're going to need to pay attention to so that you're not feeding that subluxation and keeping that stress stuck there. Because we might be able to remove a subluxation, but if you go home to a cesspool of stress and processed foods and a terribly emotionally, ridiculously toxic environment and relationship, it's going to be a really big uphill battle. As I said, your body can always change. Your brain can always change. It can always get better. But oh, you can't even quite see that, but it says of, excuse me, I totally lost my train of thought. You can always get better, but if you're going to be climbing up a hill instead of us working on a flat surface or even downhill because you've removed so many of these things, it's going to make a big difference. It's going to improve that entire care and experience that you have. There's families, and we actually make our care plans accordingly to these families who are like, we've done it all. Right? We've done it all. We eat organic food. We have a whole food diet. We've taken away the sugar, the grain, the dairy. We go to the occupational therapist. We are, getting a sleep hygiene down. We don't do screens. If they've already done it all, they've got the gut protocol, everything, supplementation down, that's going to make a huge difference. And we see it in these kids, and the care planning is going to be accordingly. But if we have people who come in and their teen is on 5 or 6 drugs, they eat an atrocious diet, and they have a poor relationship with one of their parents, we know that this is going to be extended. I've got a quote on here that you guys, I'm sure, have already read from the Centers on the Developing Child in Harvard, and they look at this extensive research to see what prolonged stress can do on the body and the toxic damaging effects on learning behavior and health across the lifespan. We know that environment truly matters. We can only reach that potential, like I talked about before. You're like, I've tried these things before, it helped a little bit, if that brain and that body is fully connected. When it's not, here's the 7 things that we see altered. Remember, the function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells. And when stress is turned up, things are turned down, including your body's ability to perceive where you're at in time and space. Motor skills are off, the gut and the brain connection, your immune system gets turned down. Speech typically is affected in many of the cases, not always. Socially, not interacting well, behaviors off, and emotional component. You guys, this is a big one for me. I am an emotional driven, energy driven person. And I know when I was having a son who was not even 5 years old, no, he was 5 years old at the time when I really started figuring this out. I said when he was 3 or 4, he started struggling enough for me to realize that I needed to do something about it. But when he was 5 and having a complex about himself, when his self-esteem was so affected that he didn't even like himself and he knew something was wrong, that was a really huge deal for me. That there was a heartbreaker, because I thought, who on earth is tearing you down? Right? As a family, we are not tearing him down. And I just thought, what is happening that your sense of reality is so altered that you are emotionally having a struggle that appears to almost be like low self-esteem or depression at age 5. It was very, very concerning to me, but it helped me get a really good understanding of where this would come from. When families are like, we are super supportive. Like, I don't understand why this, my child is whatever, XYZ. I've had an 8-year-old and that was suicidal. Like, I don't understand it. We're a loving family, but he's so stressed. That nervous system that he's living his life through is so stressed out. It's that subluxation that he can't help feed. And that lid has been off for so long that he's so wired for stress that we need to be able to have time to undo what has been done. So this next section is really sciencey. It's really about the neurology and what's going on, but I'm going to tell some of you who are my drivers on here, who are like, okay, I get it. Like, dude, my kid needs this. Like, stop talking about it. You can give me the details later. I just want to come in. I need to talk to you. Like, yes, you're describing my child. You're describing my life. You're describing my pregnancy. I don't care about your science. Then you can click the button below with a link that says, I've listened. I want to bring my child in for a neurological exam. And at the end, I'm going to talk about what a neurological scan looks like and how we measure the central nervous system. So once again, if you are a driver and you're like, this is too many words, this is too much talking, just let's get the answers. It sounds like this is exactly what my child is struggling with. This is what I'm struggling with. Stop talking. Let's do this. Then you need to stop the video now, and you need to make an appointment with us. And there's going to be a special pricing at the end as well. It is normally $189 for people to come in with off the street. If there's a high complex case, it's $300. Today, for sitting in, for being committed to your health, for being committed to your child, it's $100. And you guys, that's a big deal, because I know that so many parents have been trying and throwing money at so many things in so many directions that I need to lower the barrier, and I need to lower the hurdle for you to be able to come in and to talk to me and to get your child examined and to have their central nervous system looked at and to see if a subluxation is what is going on inside of your child's life. So for those of you who want the science, this offer is always going to stand. For if you've listened to this Perfect Storm workshop, once again, there is a live link that's going to be on there for the next 24 hours. I'm going to be on here tomorrow to answer questions for those of you who are like, I need to know more. Great. This is what we're going to look at as more right now. Movement. As I said, I started noticing with Landon when the gravity was up against him, when he started walking, that he took a long time to be able to do it. He was about 16 months old. That's really when I started to see some of the components of what now I know as a subluxation start moving into his life. And there's something called dyskinesia in this movement equation that we're going to be looking at. And this is where it's going to help you tie in or marry in what you typically are thinking about with a chiropractor. If you are typically like, okay, yes, I went in, I got adjusted, and now I feel better, right? You've got that movement component to it. Now I can move my hip and my neck again. Because part of the component, the neurological component to the subluxation is movement driven. Dyskinesia is something that happens, and yes, it happens every time your kid falls, right? A small, minute subluxation. Does it necessarily matter? Maybe. We don't know unless we examine them, unless we run a neurological scan on them. But I want you to go back even farther. I want you to watch this video and take a look at the neurological stress that could cause dyskinesia in your child. And this is a big deal, you guys. This is a scheduled cesarean section. Okay, I've watched that video 1,000 times. I'm not even kidding you. Obviously, we've heard those doctors whistling. We heard them having a conversation. We heard them absolutely non-urgent. But when we watch what they do, you're thinking they're obviously not trying to hurt that child. But everyone who watches that video says, wow, I didn't know that happened. And I had a labor and delivery nurse and obstetrician sitting in the front row of one of my workshops. And the nurse had said, well, they're so malleable and pliable. And my husband looked at her and said, would you let someone do that to your child? She's like, do you have a gun? No. And the obstetrician said, it's not a gentle process. It is not a gentle process. No one would ever allow this to occur moments after birth, right? If that baby was up on that mom's chest and the doctor grabbed the baby by the head or neck right then and there, he would go to jail. We know this. Those are delicate fibers around that spinal cord. Those are delicate babies and necks. When we're passing the baby around, the one thing we're holding is the head and the neck before we pass it on. Like, oh, don't let the head fall. We know innately how important that is and how vital that area is, yet this is how 33% of babies are coming into the world. Here's one without a vacuum. Here's one just using hands. And just look at his little face. Look where that doctor's hands are. Does that baby look like he wants to nurse or latch? Does he look like he's going to turn his head both directions? I want you to think about spraining like a shoulder or an ankle, right? You've moved it out of place too far. Someone yanked it out too far. You did something crazy to it, and you're like, oh, right? They tell you, the doctor tells you, start moving it as soon as you can. You start moving it, loosen up those muscles. The thing hurts. It's inflamed. It's probably red. You're probably annoyed and irritable and real pissed off because it hurts. Like, I've sprained my shoulder and my ankle. It's not comfortable by any means. I can articulate it. Babies cannot. Them telling you that they're subluxated, have a strain, sprain, have an injury to their head, neck, or jaw is screaming. Remember, I told you that 1 through 7 colicky baby, one that probably doesn't want to turn or nurse or latch, those delicate fibers of that spinal cord are controlling that jaw, tongue, and swallowing mechanism. Not only the baby to be able to calm down and relax. If we were in bed, just sleeping in a nice, warm, comfortable area, and someone came in and pulled you out of your bed by your head and neck and flicked on the lights and wiped you down with a towel and was jamming a suction down your throat, you'd be freaking out. That is fight or flight for sure. Now your head and neck's injured. Once you calm down enough to realize, like, oh my gosh, this hurts. I mean, if anybody did that to our head or neck, we probably wouldn't be walking. It's a pretty big deal, you guys. It's a really big deal. And you might be there thinking, well, I didn't have a cesarean section. I just had a vaginal birth. You know what? There is over 60 pounds of axial pressure put on a head or neck of a baby in a normal vaginal birth. That's in the medical textbooks that they teach the obstetricians. But no one would ever apply that kind of pressure to a head or neck of a baby. And there are some people who do have beautiful, wonderful, amazing births, and their child had the cord wrapped around its neck. They couldn't help it. It's happened to my sister. Beautiful, peaceful home birth, but when he came out, the cord was wrapped around a couple times, too tight. Big deal. It's a real big deal. It interfered with him neurologically for several months of his life to nurse, latch. We scanned him. We have a neurological scanning unit that we were measuring that with. But here's what we'll see in these children who have an injury. We will often see, once they're up against gravity, is, remember this upper cervical spine where the doctor was pulling on? That misalignment, that fixation will cause the head and neck to get locked up, misalignment, fixation, and not move appropriately. Those joints have been fixed in that area. And what we'll see is a little head tilt. We'll often see shoulders are off just a little bit. The hips are off, knees are off, arms, shoulders. We look at everything when a child is coming in, how their brain moves, how fast their body moves, how coordinated it is, really matters. We know that the brain is in control of that. That's how fast the brain can move. We're looking at all of this when a child is coming in. There's a really big neurological examination process that's occurring, and this is one of the main things that we're looking at, along with neurological balance. This head tilt, I know many of you are going to be like checking your kids in the morning when they wake up. Hopefully they're in bed by now. You're going to be looking at their kids in the morning to see if they're in balance, if that birth process started this, because once they get up against gravity, and once gravity settles in, they start to really pick where their body is at, because their head always and eyes are always going to want to be level there. And you can see this beautiful brainstem here in red of how torqued it gets. And that brainstem is a big deal. We all know how big that brainstem is. We also know how big of a deal this first cervical vertebra is. Do you guys remember this yellow one right here? This is the one. It's called the Atlas. But do you guys remember when Superman had his accident, which bone he broke in his body? His upper cervical spine. And he was on a ventilator. He couldn't talk. He was on a respirator. I mean, the man's quality of life we all saw completely diminish. He actually passed away from an infection that he couldn't fight from a bed sore, which is extremely devastating for anyone. But don't you think for just a moment that even a little bit of pressure in that upper cervical spine, a little bit of tension near that brainstem could cause some neurological disturbance, could cause your brain and body not to work appropriately, to cause some organs and glands to be altered, because there's a huge relay system up here in this upper cervical spine and in this brainstem. That guy is responsible for a lot of business, including respiratory centers, digestive centers, autonomic nervous system, everything that's on autopilot. And what we have found through the research, and this wasn't even done by chiropractors, is that 99 out of 100 infants, they found a pattern of a subluxation in during the birth. And we've known this since the 80s. Once again, a medical doctor did the research to find out natural vaginal deliveries. 80% of them had something called KISS syndrome, kinematic imbalance, suboccipital strain. Their upper cervical spine was being affected in the 80s with non-intervened birth. Now, in these studies, they're finding that the ones with bigger subluxation patterns have bigger problems later on compared to smaller subluxations have maybe smaller problems later on. Are either of them reaching their potential? Absolutely not. And not anybody other than pediatric chiropractors are taking a look at this. Not anybody is in that OR, that ER to say, you should have your child checked by a pediatric chiropractor. That right there, that was a lot. That probably caused some damage. You should have them checked out. Because you know what? I had a cesarean section with my first baby, not Landon, and my third baby. And for both of those, I was sent home with a specific list of what to do post-op. Specific list, not when to drive, how much weight I could carry, going upstairs, how much meds I should be taking. Nobody told me what I should be doing with my child. I had a lactation consultant come in and try to tell me that I was just needing to, move him around differently on my boob. And it was my fault, right? The nursing and latching after my first son went through a 36-hour labor posterior birth. So just complete headstand and jamming onto his head or neck, turned into a cesarean section, extremely colicky. And my first experience with pediatric chiropractic, and the miracle happened then. And with Landon, I didn't look at it as an injury. I didn't think his peaceful home birth that happened faster than I would have liked it was also an injury. That my stress prior to that home birth had set the stage for him, and him learning how to walk and be up against gravity was going to continue to be altered input to his brain. And motor development, you guys, determines brain development. We know this. We know that the pediatricians are looking at movement, right? That's how they look at the health of the brain. Is the baby hitting their motor milestones? And his were behind, but I didn't understand that this perfect storm path that he was on was going to continue to accelerate. And instead of him outgrowing something, he was going to continue to grow in something else. This is a research article that I put up in this last perfect storm that I had just found. And I know the slide doesn't look pretty, but it was looking at the association of neurodevelopmental and the risks of neurodevelopmental conditions in kids, psychiatric disorders, and the association of cesarean deliveries. This is a new article, July 2019. It just got into my hands, and so I threw the information up on here because I just thought, my gosh, thank God people are starting to look at this and starting to realize that what happens in that birth process is a big deal, right? What that wise midwife had told me. But you might have sat on the couch. You might have ate kale chips and done yoga and, not worked and just been a stay-at-home parent. It was your first child. I've even had this story before. Everything was beautiful. And what happened between that baby coming out meant a world of difference for them, meant a NICU stay, meant a lot of medication, meant a lot of worry, a lot of stress, and a lot of fight or flight for the family. It can be a huge deal. Like every single ultrasound was perfect. Everything was great. Like there was no concerns. Then when they came out, they were, lifeless or liftless, or they didn't stop screaming and they didn't stop crying, or the doctor came in and held the baby in because it was coming too fast. And that's extremely stressful, you guys. It is a big, big deal. And now when the brain is needing to take in that information, remember when I said input equals output, we're often looking at the output we don't like. That input to the brain is now altered. It's something called disafferentation. And I've got a great video that I want you guys to be able to watch to fully understand what disafferentation is, because when it's not getting the nice, beautiful, calm information that it needs, it's going to do guesswork. We know that the brain does this, but that guesswork is often filled up with noise, something called nociception. I want you guys to watch this video. It's done by a pediatric OT. I love OTs. It's a beautiful and brilliant video, but it helps illustrate disafferentation in a really great way. All right, so obviously that was, like I said, done by an occupational therapist. They're using movement. They understand that movement's going to help develop the brain. They are also, especially the ones that I get to talk to, very on board for understanding how the movement got off in the first place, especially during that birth process. And when you're looking at those smooth superhighways, right, that's beautiful communication. Those jagged ones, that was disafferentation. That's what that looks like. And whether they did this on purpose or not, but they showed, that first they weren't crossing over at the brainstem, right, the disafferentation, and then all of a sudden the smooth superhighways were. So we're looking at that brainstem and what it does for neurological signaling and patterning. That guy is air traffic control in that upper cervical spine. It's a really big deal. And as I said before, earlier on, if you caught this or not, when I said movement is such a big deal, and your brain is fed by electrical impulses from your muscles and from that movement, 60% 60% is coming from the spine. Proprioception is that sense of movement and balance. When your neck, and 33% from the upper cervical, upper neck and spine, when it is off, when it is locked up, when it is misaligned and fixated, like it is in many of the children that we see, and it's not getting the feedback that it needs, the perception is off, there's disafferentation there. That means that your nervous system is off. That is extremely stressful when proprioception gets filled up with nociception and noise. Your brain gets wired for stress. And the most beautiful thing about gentle, specific, and safe chiropractic adjusting is that it is improving that proprioception. Remember I talked to you about it is closing down on that lid. It is helping the brain and the body communicate the way that it needs to. It is helping that information, that afferentation come in. It is helping the brain see with clarity. It's helping that prefrontal cortex do higher level brain and creative thought that it needs to do. It's a really big deal. And what'll happen when that perception is off, as I said, you live your life through your nervous system. Everything you think, say, or do, taste, smell, or touch is off. When that subluxation is there rearing its head, the life that you're living, that nervous system you're living your life through becomes extremely stressed. The senses are off. It's got a broken volume control, just as the video had said. When you're looking at many of these children, the sensory processing diagnosis is probably the most true. It is a sensory processing issue. The senses are off. The perception is off. The nervous system is off. It is neurologically driven. Your brain can't make the right choices. It's got to try its very best. It's never going to give up. It's going to look for input in other areas. If it's not getting the movement from the spine, it's going to look for it in the hands, the jaw, the feet, the groin, or other areas with high dense proprioceptive feedback. And those are the kids who are like, oh my gosh, you don't start moving your jaw or your tongue, or you're always chewing, or they're chewing on inanimate objects, or they're biting their fingernails, or they won't stop moving their feet, or they're a toe walker. All of this plays into the sensing. All of this is part of the way the brain is trying to get information and the way the brain is trying to get fed. Over 90% of what your brain's energy can be going to at any given moment is proprioception, that movement, awareness of time and space, of where you're at. We really take it for granted. If you are a coordinated, athletic individual who doesn't trip over their own feet, who can easily and gracefully move from one task to another and pick up a pencil and draw, and you have beautiful handwriting and all that you have that's neurologically connected, we take this for granted. And then you see a child clumsy and falling over their own feet and unable to throw or catch a ball. This was Landon. You're like, what is it? Like, did you not get the athletic gene? No, the brain doesn't have the right feedback. It doesn't have awareness of where the body parts are. This is later on in adults as well, where we're like, it's not that you have back pain, your hip isn't out, it's that your brain doesn't know where your hip is at. And it doesn't get the feedback that it needs. So you don't know what kind of pressure to put down. You don't know the orientation of where your feet and your knee are. And this is wear and tear. But this is a different conversation as we're talking about kids. And when that 90% of what that brain is doing is trying to look for proprioception, and that brain is so stressed and is so stuck, what has been missing out is those organs and glands who are supposed to be growing and developing, is that immune system, is that digestive tract. We get something called dysautonomia. The autonomic nervous system is out, is off, is struggling, is challenged. And Bruce Lipton says you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. This, you guys, is where I see a lot of the immune struggles come in. This dysautonomia is where we really see parents get scared. This is where immune systems are low. These are people that are under constant threat of a virus, have it be exposed to you when your body can't do what it needs to do. I'm going to move my head up right here a little bit, moving ahead. But here's the beautiful thing. These things can change. I told you your bodies are self-healing, they're self-regulating, and that rest, digest, growth, repair, heal side of your nervous system is stimulated. It can be stimulated. And one of the biggest players into this is the vagus nerve. That gut-brain connection, as we kept mentioning, is the vagus nerve. It has 9 times more fibers than any other cell in the body. This vagus nerve is the gut-brain connection. Vagus means wandering. The vagus nerve is actually a nerve that comes from the brain. And there's 12 what we call cranial nerves. Most of them innervate the face and the neck, and there's 2 that leave the cranial vault, one being the vagus nerve, and the other one is a spinal accessory nerve. That's actually part of one that's in with babies, the torticollis. That's a huge deal. Torticollis and plagocephaly, those are really highly affected, but we've known for a long time that parasympathetic and vagal nerve tone are off in kids with sensory processing issues. They just don't understand where the restriction is. And often, especially in kids with epilepsy, they will start to look at what's called implanting a vagal nerve stimulator. Some of you might already know about these, where they actually cut into the neck and attach an electrode next to the vagus nerve to stimulate it so that you can turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, because we know that the parasympathetic nervous system isn't working. But like I just said, you can't be in growth and protection at the same time. Let me just show you. Let me move this out of the way. And unfortunately, what happens when the body's not getting the input that it wants? It's misaligned. It's fixated. There's a huge subluxation there. We're driving that stress response. That we're experiencing disafferentation. We're experiencing dysautonomia. We also will experience something called dysphonesis, and that's abnormal energy output. And we see it in a couple different forms. Sometimes there's too little energy, there's the fatigue point, and sometimes there's too much energy. And we don't diagnose in our office ever, but we can put kids into categories that we will see similarities to and characteristics to, and often it plays into their care planning, because the first one will also play into the brain, how fast the brain is moving, which is the raging bull who never stops moving their body. We all know what a raging bull is. Those are people with high energy. These are probably the ADHD kids that can't focus, that might literally be the person in your house that you are living on eggshells with, because you don't know when they're gonna freak out next. A raging bull is an energy turned up type of a child, a busy brain child. They're usually a little bit more stout, and this does actually change the way that we're able to adjust a child that has a raging bull compared to someone that's a drunken bull, because the drunken bull's brain moves a little bit slower, sometimes a lot of bit slower. Sometimes these kids can't make the neurological connections that they need. A lot of these kids are actually taller and lankier. Their muscles don't have quite the neurological connection that they need. They move a little bit slower. They often have glasses. These are typically my speech kids as well. The drunken bull can often lose the fight with gravity. Those are the kids that often will have really awkward gait and have a little bit less of a organized brain that can put all of these pieces together, and they take a little bit more time. But there can also be drunken raging bulls or raging drunken bulls, and they can have components of 50-50, 80-20. We'll see these in the scans. And you know what a drunken raging bull looks like, or you can imagine, or you might be living with one as well. Those are usually the real stuck sensory or spectrum kids, or the epileptic kids, where you're like, I don't know if you're coming or going. Sometimes they're sensory seeking, sometimes they're sensory avoiding, sometimes they sleep all day, sometimes they're nuts. They can't focus at all. And I've got a kid. I'm going to show you Caleb, and a child who was that drunken raging bull, whose mom came to us because of a nursing and latching issue with her youngest child, who was told to come to our office. And when she started to hear the story of the perfect storm, she said, my Caleb needs to come into you. we've done everything. This is the mom that was like, we've removed all toxins, all gluten, all dairy. We've stopped vaccinating. We've stopped putting any medication in his body. Like, this family was like, we are going as pure as we can because we know all of the stresses in his life that are causing him to get triggered. And despite her best efforts, she had interviewed him to go into a private school in kindergarten. He didn't pass the interview process. He wasn't able to focus. They said, I'm sorry, he's unable to attend here. He won't be a really good fit, which devastated this mom. And she brought him into us. And when she told us the story of his birth, it was extremely traumatic one, where he had lost all vitals during the birth process. Mom was given Pitocin, baby was stressed, heart decels until the point of they're done. And as soon as he lost all vitals, mom was cut open from hip to hip and baby was out in less than 3 minutes. He was resuscitated for 15. So no oxygen to his brain for 15 minutes, whisked off to the NICU, and was told he's going to be there. He was in the highest dose of anti-seizure medication he could be on. They told him he's going to be there for 6 weeks. And when you did get him out, expect him to have all the things: sensory, spectrum, epilepsy, cerebral palsy. Like, this kid's not going to have a high quality of life. And their mom said, well, we're going to do everything we can. She found a pediatrician who was on her side, who educated her in all of the natural healing. And this is in California, because I know people are going to ask me, like, who's the pediatrician? This was in California before she came here. And despite her best efforts, look at the amount of stress, what we would call dysautonomia, in this child's upper cervical spine. I know you don't have to be a medical doctor to look at that, or a chiropractor or anything in between to look at and say, that does not look good at all. Right? That's how altered his perception of the world was. He was having night terrors. He thought he was being chased by wolves. The kid couldn't sleep. He couldn't concentrate. He had constant meltdowns. He was interfering with the whole family, with the other children who didn't understand why he had special treatment. It was a really big deal for this family. And we've got a post scan over here on the right. You can kind of see the dates here. But just a month later, and this is by no means a stopping point, but this is a month later when his dysautonomia really started to fade, when his brain and his body was completely reconnecting and deciding on how to heal and where to place it healing first, because that's the most beautiful thing about the body and the brain. It decides. It makes priority. It makes the choices of what to heal first. Some people are like, I really wanted that behavior to change first, but now their guts actually improve. Like, I can't choose, right? I can't choose for the brain. It is highly intelligent and it knows what to do once the communication's been cleared up. So here's a picture of the EMG, the dysphonesis, and this is the one that's looking at electrical impulses in the health of the spinal cord. So if you've ever seen like an EKG of the heart or an EEG of the brain, when you're looking at electrical impulses in and around that spinal cord, this is part of that feedback to the brain. When I say that your brain is living on proprioception, it lives on electrical impulses, and organization and that motor movement determines brain development. These are some of the pieces that we're looking at for this. And when we took a look at Caleb's first scan of his EMG, by the way, we're measuring these to a millionth of a microvolt. His line is this black line here. We would really love it if it was within this green to white mean. So you can see just how far outside the means was. An energy score for a child, a healthy one, is 120 to 150. He was running at 274. But now we look at month 2, if you remember it from the dysphonesis, internally healing, brain organizing. So I give this example when we see this as a closet analogy, where you've got a linen closet that needed to be cleaned. Right? You've jammed enough stuff in there where you're like, oh, there's stuff behind there and back there, and I really need to just clean this out and figure out what I need to keep. And you just take it all out and dump it out on the floor. That's what month 2 was looking like for that family. His body was deciding what he needed to keep, what he needed to donate, what just needed to be thrown away. And then neatly tucking everything back into place, where we see 427 how much more organized his body was. Look at that black line compared to the previous months and how well it started to respond and calm down. This is just, you know what? These are some of the moments where you look at the brain and say, that thing is amazing. It can do brilliant things with clear and concise communication. It is always trying. It never is trying to make errors. It's an extremely intelligent system doing the best it can with what it has. And what he had was a subluxation that was so severe that mom had completely stopped feeding it, but it was still living there. We measure that. We measure that fight or flight response. Remember the chasing of the bear or saber-toothed tiger? How loose is your lid? We measure that as well. It's called an HRV, heart rate variability. This is beautiful science and technology that cardiologists and some psychiatrists have been using for a number of years. It's brought into the chiropractic profession, thankfully, and it's a brilliant tool for us to be able to look at the body and give a really good idea of what kind of healing reserve it has. How well, over here on the left, is the autonomic nervous system running? How far into fight or flight is the body? How low is it on an energy charge? How much time is this going to take? And unfortunately, at the time that Caleb had started, I didn't have the equipment, the pediatric equipment. Now I do. This was just adult equipment, and they've since made new technological advances where now we have some for peds. So I only have in month 2 and month 3 here for him that to be able to show his data. However, you can just, who knows where he was at in month 1 when he first came in, but he's still in fight or flight and into the yellow zone for this kid. Once again, despite mom's best efforts, he was still losing battery charges, and despite them trying to just avoid everything that causes stress to him, he was still there. He was still stuck in fight or flight. Where we want this dot is up here in the green box and center, as far as or as close to center as we can get it, because that tells us that when you're taking that test, when there's no stimulus around, when you shouldn't feel like the world is a threat, you should be balanced between sympathetic and parasympathetic, which is our ultimate goal. That means your body can handle and adapt to stress. Now, I wish I would have had Landon scans. Yeah, Landon scans there's so many scans of Landon's. He was my experiment child to see, okay, what happens after one adjustment? What happens after this amount of time? What happens if I adjust with this kind of, technique? And the most beautiful thing was it didn't matter what technique I necessarily used on him. And now our skills have gotten so advanced, this was 5 years ago, that we do know specifically what technique and how the bodies are responding of each child to different techniques. But for Landon, he was my first one. This is when I got training on this neurological system. It's when I got specifically trained in pediatrics. And I just remember the first time looking out the window of my house and seeing Landon and my son Hunter throwing and catching a ball. And that was, you guys, that was a big deal for my family. We're an extremely athletic family. That's how we bonded. And he had absolutely no athletic skill. I would throw a ball to him and say, how many balls are coming? And he'd be like, 6. Like, he couldn't. His body had terrible perception, terrible. And I just thought he just wasn't going to be an athlete. And today, at 10 years old, he led his basketball team in scoring and rebounds. The kid is figuring it out. His brain has rewired to be efficient and effective. It's what it wants to do. Prior to that, he couldn't read or write. This was his handwriting. When I showed him a picture of his name, which he had been working on for 3 years, in preschool, in the Montessori preschool, he had been seeing his name everywhere. He didn't know that said Landon. I just told him to write it down and copy it. And I had a piece of paper saying Landon right above that. I sent this picture to my girlfriend and said, what do you think? And she looked at it. She's the early childhood special ed teacher. And she looked at it and said, I think he's got a processing disorder. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I don't know where to start. She said, take him to early childhood. He didn't qualify for any services there. They didn't have any answers as to why. And it just sent me down this cascade of what was happening, because this kindergarten teacher had told me he couldn't go to kindergarten. And for me, that was really devastating, because I'm like, I can't send him when he's 7. Like, what? I don't even know what is homework going to look like at the kitchen table in high school if he can't even learn a letter, if he can't recognize his name, if he can't hold a pencil right now. And we've been trying for 3 years, and his brother had gone through this program, reading, writing, accelerated. I just didn't know what I was going to do. And that's when I found these answers. And one of the slides that I show, which is this next one, I know you guys already saw, one of these slides, this is what I didn't have when I was starting out with Landon, even though I did all the training, even though I learned all about it, even though it was hundreds of hours on pediatric specific training, and especially on children like Landon and children like yours, I didn't have this graph. I didn't necessarily believe yet that the brain could change. But I want to show this because I think this is extremely encouraging to look and see, okay, here's the age, here's the brain's ability to change. Here's the amount of effort it takes. Look at that. Like, even if you're 70 and you're watching this show, this didn't peg out, right? This is still happening for you. Things are still changing. Life can still get better. But I didn't have this for Landon, and I didn't know when to expect some of the changes. And when I saw that, I knew his brain was changing. I sent him to kindergarten. You guys, I sent him to kindergarten. He left kindergarten reading and writing. This was his handwriting. He was doing math. He was doing multiplication in kindergarten. He started speaking clearly. I didn't even mention that for him. His confidence was up. He was sleeping through the night. He was having less meltdowns. I mean, you can read his story and many other stories in my office. Our office walls are lined with children and adults whose lives have been changed through proper brain and body connection, through the design that was already there in the first place. That something was interfering with the process and no one told them what. That stress was feeding it and no one told them why. That their lives were being destroyed and no one told them how to turn it around. That their life potential was so much less, that there was so much more beauty inside of their bodies that couldn't be released because they were tired, because they were stressed, because they were upset, because life wasn't going their way, because they were so subluxated. And I get to be this beautiful messenger. I'm just the middleman to say, if I remove a subluxation, that brain and that body was made to heal. It was made to self-regulate. It was made to be healthy, and it can do it. It's the most rewarding thing I've been able to do, and to watch families change. We will literally watch the body language of families and children walking through our office change. Weight gets lifted off shoulders. Kids have smiles on faces. They bring spelling tests in. Or like, I didn't even study and I got a 95%. I used to study all the time and I got a 40% on my spelling test. I can read. I have kids that come in and their goal is to read, and they can read. Some parents are like, my goal for them is just to sleep through the night. And they do it, right? Parents, sometimes our expectations are just so low of what our kids can do when our brains are bombarded and being clouded and fogged with stress. It's just unbelievable. People ask me if there's side effects to chiropractic. There's 4 really good ones, actually. Right? Some people are like, well, once I bring them to the chiropractor, I always have to bring them to the chiropractor? For as long as you want chiropractic benefits. You want to see the benefits of chiropractic care, you bring them to a chiropractor. What we do when we have a child come in, we measure the stress that's been on their nervous system. We give them a game plan to get the stress off. And then we say, we're not going to leave you high and dry. We're not going to tell you that wait till this comes back. We're going to say, let's keep it this way. Let's let them live and grow and develop this way. And let's put you on a well plan. And those are some of the most amazing, beautiful children. Of course, mine being some of them, where I look at them, even if they do get injured, even if they do get sick, they bounce back like no other. Hunter, my oldest, had rolled his ankle and fractured it. And he was told after he got out of his boot, this was in February, that he would be ready for agility by August. Well, in May, his relay team beat the school record with him in it. He bounced back like no other. And of course, as parents, we knew that his body needed movement. Once that foot was out of that cast, it needed movement. We knew his brain needed to have input from that area, and his brain and body could be fully connected to be able to heal and put concentrated energy into it. And there wasn't a disconnection that was there anymore. And for Landon, the disconnection, the 5th D that I hadn't mentioned before, that was the big player. That was the emotional component that I said he is so disconnected from himself, he doesn't even like himself. These are the kids that come in with low confidence, who don't want to talk about their struggles because they've been not only so judged, they've been to so many doctors, they've been told that there's something wrong with them. They come into my office, they're going to hear what's going right, and they're going to hear what could go more right when they come into my office, because there are so many people in this world to beat a child down, to tell them they're not good enough. And this goes for you too, adults, to tell you you're not good enough, that you haven't tried enough, that what you're doing doesn't matter. There's enough people out there to tell them that. And enough people out there to tell you that, mom and dad, that you aren't doing enough, that you aren't enough, that you shouldn't be trusting your gut. And you knew all along that you are enough and you are right. When our brains and bodies are disconnected, we have a real hard time believing that. We have a real hard time absorbing that information. We have a real hard time feeling worthy. And when kids get to this 5th D and they feel disconnected, and that emotional component is there, that pulls at my heartstring like no other. I know that there is something beautiful inside of their body that needs to be released. Beautiful. And that there's some beauty on the other side of that subluxation and that nervous system that they've been living their life through. That was real junky. That was real crappy. That was real stressed out. That it can be repaired. It can be restored. So here's what I want you to do. I know I mentioned this already, and I had to sit and do that for my drivers on here, because I know people that are like, I just want the nuts and bolts, don't give me all the science. But for you, I want to tell you, those of you who have stuck with us, to never stop asking questions. Never stop looking for the why. Never give up hope for your kid. And I'm assuming if you're on this webinar, you are that person that said, I'm not giving up hope. I'm not going to stop asking questions. I'm not going to stop until my child has the life that they deserve. Keep it up. I want you to reduce all those 3 T's, the thoughts, traumas, toxins, the physical, chemical, and emotional stress, the slide I mentioned. And I said, if you need more help with that, I have the resources for you as well. I need you to share this video. I need you to send this link to your friends, whether it's a teacher, yes, they can get continuing education credits for it, for them to help understand what's going on with kids, whether it's another care provider, whether it's a grandparent, maybe you're the grandparent, your kids need to hear this. Yes, share this information, because this word hasn't got out enough, and we just aren't going to stop talking about it until subluxations aren't destroying families and marriages and homes and children's and self-esteems and potential. I'm not willing to stop until they are. And here's the deal. I told you that there was going to be an offer at the end. I want to see your child. I want to get them a neurological scan. I know that you've checked other systems in the body. I know that you've had their eyes checked, their ears checked, their nose checked, their throat checked, their heart checked, their urine, their stool, their blood. And if you haven't checked the most vital, most important master control system in the entire body, we need to do that. You need to click on the link. I told you it's $189 for anyone off the street to come in and get a neurological examination and a consultation and a report with the doctor. It's $300 for a complicated case. Tonight, I don't care if it's complicated or if it's average or if it's common, right? It's $100 for watching this. Click on that link, get the $100 certificate, and request an appointment. Now, here's what I'm going to do. Because of what's going on today, and you might have a child that's immunocompromised, you might be caring for an elderly parent that's immunocompromised, you might be immunocompromised yourself, and you're thinking, I don't know if I should come out right now. My kid really needs the help. I don't know if I should do this. I have to be in their office for 30 to 45, 50 minutes. I'm not sure what I should do. Well, you have a better choice right now for that. You can do a live consultation with me, kind of like this on a computer screen, and we're going to talk about your child. You're still going to fill out all the intake, so I have all that background information, but we can do it like this. For those of you who are like, no, I need to get in, I need to get this going, I don't care about what's going on. I know that chiropractors are essential care providers. I know that I can make that trip in. We're going to do this. Then you can make a one-on-one in-person first visit with me. And that $100 gets you your second visit as well, which is going to be us sitting down with a report, say, here's what we need to do about it. Here's the stress. Here's where they're at. This is where we're going to go. Once again, you can do it like this. You can do it in person. We're going to need to obviously scan your child, and I need to meet your child before we get all of the information, but we're going to make this work. We aren't going to let this stress of today keep us stressed, keep us scared, keep us in our homes for something essential that needs to be changed, because your child doesn't need to go one more day with a subluxation, altering their perception, ruining their self-esteem, ruining their ability to learn, to grow, to develop, to be a healthy, vibrant child. So I want to see you. Now, if you are watching this and you are like, I'm not near Eagle, Idaho, I'm across the country, I'm in Illinois and Iowa, some other I state, I want you to go to the National Family Wellness Alliance and look up a chiropractor, or I want you to email us directly and we're going to find you a specifically trained pediatric chiropractor in your area that does what we do. That way you can get your child some help without flying to Idaho. I have had kids do that before. Stay the whole summer, not with me, but stay the whole summer in order to get care at our office because there was no one near them, and they knew that this was going to be able to change their child's life. So I hope that I get to meet you very soon. And if you're the person that I'm going to come in, I do want to come in, I don't want to do the phone consultation, but I know that this link expires in 24 hours. What should I do? Then I want you to get it, buy it anyways, and come in when you're ready. Come in when you feel comfortable. Here's the link, you guys, that has the $100 offer that's on it. You can put it up on your phones. It's going to be posted underneath this video. It's going to be posted when you register, but fill it out. If you've got more than one child, yes, every single child can be $100. You can purchase for as many children as you'd like to come in, or for yourself. Here's the other things I'm going to have you do. I want you to follow us if you already aren't on social media. I want you to follow the National Family Wellness Foundation. They're all about drug-free natural solutions for families. None of their money is going to go to any sort of drug research at all. It's going to go into health and wellness. And if you are the person that's like, I need more science, I need to know more information, here's some other resources. And yes, we do go to schools, but right now it's probably on hold, and maybe I could do a Zoom with the teachers who are probably sitting at home missing all of their children. So thank you for sticking with me. I just love and appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching. I really hope that I've given you hope.